The most dangerous thing in Final Fantasy VIII isn't ultimacia, time compression, or Zone's erratic battle movements. It's the player's knowledge. In any game, or any experience for that matter, progression is its own reward. If I play Devil May Cry,
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light.
The player I was at the beginning, launching enemies and dual wielding with Ebony and Ivory, is still a part of the player that I become at the end. There's just a bunch of other techniques and proficiencies I've leveled up along the way. If I then go back and start DMC from neutral, not New Game Plus, I take with me all that collective knowledge of previous playthroughs, like someone trying to carry a bunch of shopping bags from the car to the house. But with more style, I can play better, more effectively. I may know which techniques to prioritize, where items are, how enemies function. It doesn't necessarily break the game, I'm just doing it again, but better this time. As Francis Bacon said,
knowledge is power.
Seize him.
Just as that's the case in an action game like DMC, a sports game like FIFA, and in RPGs, knowledge of its systems is an extremely powerful tool, especially when we replay an RPG for the second, third, 100th time. Of course, you're still there for the memorable moments, but it's enhanced, like adding a scoop of ice cream to brownies. You're thinking, now that I know all this stuff, it's going to be different, in a good way. But what's that got to do with FFVIII, and what does First Viscount St. Alban and ice cream have in common to jobs in FFVIII? We'll get into that, but first, let me explain how we'll be breaking down this video for those that may want to jump right into the jobs without all this context beforehand. Well, firstly, we need to talk about how we break Final Fantasy VIII. Secondly, we'll then look at the modding scene for the game. Thirdly, we need to understand the XP leveling curves and the GFs. Fourthly, we need to understand our limitations within FF8 systems and what we want to achieve by implementing a job-like system. And fifthly, I'll explain each character's job and give it some context. One important thing to note is that we're going to be using the systems Final Fantasy VIII already has in place to do this, for better and for worse. In FF8, as we've said, knowing the game too well breaks it. It could possibly be the easiest FF title to break in the shortest amount of time. And what do we mean exactly when we say break? I'll leave it to Deadbubble's response on a Binding of Isaac discussion page to succinctly sum up the concept. Breaking the game typically means to abuse the game's mechanics, items, etc. in some way to get ungodly powerful, or at least get a huge advantage somehow. Typically, not something you can do by accident. If you've spent any time playing FF8, you will know exactly what I'm referring to. If we take a look at a speedrun of FF8, the time from commencing the game, when Squall wakes up from getting booped by Sifa, to starting to collect the first triple triad cards needed, takes roughly 5.5 minutes. It's perfectly feasible that within your first 2 hours of playing FF8, you are on your way to being overpowered enough to just steamroll the rest of the game. But dial it back a second, because maybe someone hasn't played FF8, or you have, but just casually, and it's been a while, and your back hurts now. So saying that you can break the game in less time than it would take to take the game out of its original jewel case, fumble when trying to close the jewel case to make sure it doesn't snap, setting up your PlayStation, putting the disc in the PlayStation, watching the boot screen, starting the game, and then watching the opening cinematic may seem a little absurd. I roughly timed that, by the way. Setting up your PlayStation and inserting the disc, yes, there is a video in glorious 60 FPS of a guy doing just that. Then you've got the boot screen next, 16 seconds, and then you've got the opening cutscene, which is roughly 3 minutes and 16 seconds. There's also a ton of videos out there which people have watched where people put the wrong format disc into consoles. Seriously, what is the worst I could? There is a game within a game, Triple Triad. In the PS1 era of RPGs, it was kind of expected to have minigames in your RPGs, and we see this dialed up to 11 in games like Ryugo Gotaku. It was not only extremely popular in Final Fantasy VIII, but it even made a return for FF11 and some other FF title, I just forget its name. Without getting too much into detail, Triple Triad is a card game. So let's turn to the Final Fantasy Wiki for a brief explanation. Triple Triad is played on a 3x3 square grid of blank spaces where the cards are placed. Each card has 4 numbers placed in the top left corner from 1 to 10, with the letter A representing 10. Pink cards belong to the opponent and blue cards belong to the player. Basically, you want your larger number next to an opponent's smaller number to flip the card and make it yours. If you have the most cards at the end of the round, you get to choose one of the opponent's cards to keep. The more you delve into the game and its associated side quest, the more complex the rules of the game become. Shout out to anyone out there who has gotten the Alexander card from Piet on the space station. The part that is most relevant to breaking the game is acquiring those cards. A lot of cards have their uses, but there is perhaps one that is most relevant for most thoroughly breaking the game. All cards collected in Triple Triad aren't solely used to expand your collection or gain more of an advantage over opponents. Cards can be transformed into items. Refined is what the game calls it. While we'll be getting more into GFs, Guardian Forces, later on, one such GF, Quetzalcoatl, is able to learn an ability called Card Mod. Card Mod refines cards into items, and Quetzalcoatl is one of the first GFs that you can get. Or, if you don't listen to your teacher like a good boy, you miss out on it forever. GFs, like the player character, level up when engaging in battle. After most battles, you will earn AP, ability points, in addition to XP. AP is used to acquire abilities that your GF has learned. They range from being able to junction magic to stats to other abilities, specifically the Card Mod ability. In Quetzalcoatl's case, with the Card Mod ability, the player can now refine cards into items. Shortly after the game begins, one of your first missions is to head to the fire cabin just outside of Garden. You don't even have to do this right away, you can head straight to the beach area close to Balam. Here, you'll find the Fasitakalon F enemy, and they provide 2 things. Number 1, at this point in the game, they yield good AP, so you acquire the Card Mod ability for Quetzalcoatl, and because the other GF you're given at the start, Shiva, can learn to refine ice magic, you can learn that too. And number 2 is, they sometimes drop fish fin items. You then use Shiva's ice refine ability to turn 1 fish fin into 20 waters. You then junction water to Squall's attack, providing a decent attack boost at this early part of the game. The next step comes around the 1 hour 30 to 2 hour mark in the game. Headmaster Sid gives you a mission to help some rebels in Timber. If you talk to him after the mission briefing, he'll give you the magic lamp. You use this item to summon another GF, Diablos. Upon successfully defeating Diablos, you can quickly teach it, using the same fish farming method as before, the ability to refine time and space magic. Remember that Quistis card? Well, it can be refined into 3 Samantha Souls with Quetzalcoatl's Card Mod ability. Then you can simply use Diablos' ability to refine time space magic to get 60 triples per Samantha Soul. Triple is the 5th best magic to junction against your strength. Well, it's the 4th because technically you can't get Apocalypse to junction, though you can cast it. 100 triples boosts Squall's strength stat by an additional 70 points. Now, after a little over 2 hours of investment, you can steamroll Final Fantasy VIII. Compared to all the FF7 mods out there, the modding scene for Final Fantasy VIII is relatively sparse. Sure, you can find mods that upscale, upres, and outright retexture or remodel aspects of the vanilla game, on PC at least. However, to find something on the scale of Brave New World for FF6 or New Threat for FF7 that I mentioned in my previous video, you kinda come up empty. But almost. Sega Chief does have an FF8 New Threat mod, and it's one of the most comprehensive along with the Ragnarok mod. Major changes on the former include spells now possessing a hierarchy that will give your character stat gains. The in-game example of this is when a GF like Brothers would learn Strength Up, where you gain additional stat points on a level. It also draws parallels with the Esper system in Final Fantasy VI. There are other changes included, like general character stat progression, how the draw system functions, enemy behavior, and more. As always, it's well worth checking out. I'll leave a link below. It is the PC/Steam release version of the game, however. If you're on OG hardware, there is Joe Dramo's, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Joe Dram Zero's International GF Job System Mod 2. Leveling, like a number of things in FF8, has a bit of a mixed reception. What differs in this game when compared to not just other games in the Final Fantasy series, but other JRPGs and games with RPG-like features, is that increments remain static. From levels 8 to 100, each character requires 1000 experience points. Mad props to Dinobot Maximized over on one of IGN's guides, who decided to illustrate this with ASCII art and not take the coward's way out of saying, bro, it's like 1000 XP after level 7, like I just did. As your character level increases, so do the levels of enemies that you face. Basically, it's a scaling system, similar to something like Bethesda's games.
But seriously, I haven't seen a piece of ass that fine in all of Cyrodiil, not even on the elves.
However, there are what we can call level gates, which determine the level of magic that you can draw from enemies. Briefly, they are split from level 1 to 19, 20 to 29, and 30 to 100. We'll dig into that more when we come to the jobs later on. The general consensus is that if you're fighting battles as they come and keeping on top of your junctioning, you'll be fine. But I'm guessing that the first time through the game, many players found that to be the contrary, and at least I know I did. The way experience is calculated is also worth mentioning too. I'm going to mess this up, FFVIII over at GameFAQs to help. Firstly, when determining the level of an enemy that you'll face, your active party level is taken into account. Let's say each character in our active party is level 10 for simplicity's sake. We add that all up and divide it by 3, that would be 10, though it does always round down. That's our base level. We now divide that by 5, and that's 2, I hope. This is the mod. Each enemy then has a 50% chance of being base plus mod, and a 50% chance of being base minus mod. Each enemy also has an experience modifier attached to them. Over 87 over at GameFAQs has a guide for that. Something basic like a Grat that you can fight in the training center has a modifier of 38 plus 10x, whereas Ruby Dragon has 210 plus 40x. Without getting into the calculations, which I would most certainly mess up, this is the reason why if you hop over to one of the islands of heaven or hell later in the game, you'll see your experience skyrocket compared to the basic scrubs you find in the field. Not to mention, those islands all have their enemies set as a base of 100 regardless of your level, and because they have such large modifiers attached to them, it's why after defeating, say, a Ruby Dragon, even a T-Rex, you'll not only sometimes go up by 1 level, but you can go up as much as 2 levels. Not only that, it kind of makes sense to underlevel Squall, because he's going to be the outlier in determining the level of an enemy encounter. I'm sure this must have been a factor where people felt the game difficulty kind of crept up. Say one thing about FF8, it wants you to faff about changing your party a ton and doesn't implement the systems to make this as easy as it should have. If we look at how each character's stats progress throughout the game, they are perhaps the most homogeneous out of all the series. Use a Firestorm on Neoseeker, and this post is 20 years old. Shows some extremely minor deviations in character base stats. Rinoa, comparatively, is a beast. Anecdotally, you're probably around level 20 at the end of Disc 2, pushing the mid-20s at the end of Disc 3, and well into your 30s starting Disc 4, which is obviously just after Lunatic Pandora. Potentially, because Squall's level really starts to dwarf your other party members when Disc 3 kicks off, and you may end up doing side quests, grinding XP, and whatnot, you've really got this very large level discrepancy between the rest of your party and Squall, because usually in vanilla runs, people don't bother leveling up the rest of their party, usually just, it's Squall and 2 other people, and that's kind of it, because you're very rarely forced to use the others anyway, and it's not like there's too much, different between any of them. Sometimes that's not always the best recipe for success. I touched on Guardian Forces GFs before. In Final Fantasy VIII, they have more in common with Espers in Final Fantasy VI than they do the summon materia of Final Fantasy VII. Characters can equip them, and they serve a number of functions in battle. You can summon them to do damage against your enemies. They even have a health bar, which feels like a precursor to the way they were handled in FF10. They allow you to equip commands to your character, such as GF, basically summon, magic, items, and a few GF-specific commands like Defend, Treatment, and Devour. You can select abilities for GF to learn, such as being able to junction magic to stats, bestow character abilities that you can equip, like increasing your health and attack. Some GF can even perform functions like calling a shop you visited. In FF8's early game, you won't be able to junction every stat via equipping a GF, but as you acquire more GF and unlock their abilities, each GF's efficacy in battle naturally increases. Obviously, knowing which abilities to go for right off the bat relies a lot on the player having previous knowledge or a guide to know what gets the best bang for your buck. There are echoes of jobs through GFs, mainly in the kind of spread of their unlockable skills and commands. Siren is more magically inclined with abilities that increase MP. Brothers can be seen as your classic tank with HP increasing abilities and junctions, and Alexander conforms more to that paladin archetype. A casual player may not draw many distinctions of what these echoes are through their playthrough. In reality, your first port of call is to increase the stat junction coverage and then focus on abilities that give percentage increase to stat. What I often found playing casually was that as the game progressed, you used GFs less and less. The main focus became firstly junctioning Squall with whatever spell would increase its attack the most, and then letting that mindset kind of ripple through the rest of the team until at the end game, they basically all functioned the same in battle. Everyone could output decent damage, they could all use the same spells, and you barely used unique commands that you unlock with GFs. In some ways, it parallels what kind of happens in Final Fantasy VI quite a lot, which is why when you have a mod like Brave New World, it just totally kind of changes up how you play and how you have to think of that game. Mind you, that's how I basically did it, and I tended to go through the Junction triple on Squall route too, but this time around,
He's better.
lucky for us, in Final Fantasy VIII, we have a bunch of tools that can allow us to lay the foundation for creating a job class system. Character stats can be customized through the Junction system, the game employs a tiered magic system, and GFs provide slight parallels to classic jobs. And through using this, what is it that we want to achieve? Well, we want a diverse roster of characters where each can fulfill a specific role. We want class synergy, which allows us to make combinations of characters viable, and we want level parity between characters, with Squall being the obvious and inevitable exception. And we achieve this by fully bending but not breaking the game's system. So here is an overview of the job titles that I picked for each character. Fantastic, I know. We'll dive more into the nuances in just a moment. Through the use of the junctioning and the magic tier, we'll be assigning each character's stat a tier from 1 to 3. 3 is the highest tier, while 1 is the lowest tier. I've designed the tier based on the hard limits the game puts in place. An easy example is to check out what GF abilities like mid-level magic refine allow you to refine. It's pretty simple. Fire, upgrade to Firer, and Cure, upgrade to Curer. Another point of reference is how the game itself tiers the magic that you can draw from enemies. If we take a look at the Blitz enemy, at levels 1 to 19 you can draw Thunder, at levels 20 to 29 you can draw Thundara, and at level 30 plus you can draw Thundaga. So we're going to use these levels to act as gates to the party skills, magic, etc. that we can then use to implement some progression with the job system. Think of it like how you level up materia in Final Fantasy VII. You know, you go Cure, Curer, Regen, Curaga. Or in Final Fantasy XII's International Zodiac Age License Board, where the tier of license that you unlock gives you access to more powerful spells, and it's only certain jobs that have access to those higher rank licenses. If you take a look at the White Mage, you'll see that they have access to the highest tiers of White Magic spell, whereas if you look at a White Mage adjacent role, like the Monk, they have limited access to spells at different tiers. Making these lines in the sand a little more defined in Final Fantasy VIII, we can turn to Flickmasher's post on Reddit. They detail how each magic spell, when the player has 100 of them, affect the stat. Right at the top, you've got heavy hitters like Ultima, Full Life, Meltdown, Flare, Holy, and more. If we incorporate this with gated enemy draw tiers, we can create our own tier list of magic. While a part of me feels I shouldn't have to clarify that this is my opinion, I'm doing that right now. And this is totally up for discussion. But what I've tried to take into account while creating this list are elements like enemy draw levels, the impact on player stats, the accessibility of these spells through refining items, purchasable goods, and whatnot, and the base magic damage values. Tier 1 is pretty simple. We've got the usual suspects in elemental spells, Cure, Asuna, a number of status magics, and some support magic. Arrows being replaced by water because of its lower junctioning power, and forcing the player to not rely on crippling Balam's fishing industry. While Asuna does junction well to status resistances and isn't too shabby on stats, it's a while until the former's utility can be fully taken advantage of. While a status spell like Zombie is powerful, it's just so widely available and easily drawn and refined, it doesn't make sense to gate it further. And Protect and Shell can be pretty contentious because of just how well they junction to Vitality and Spirit respectively. I'd consider them essential spells and work well when we imprint this system on classes. When you've reached level 20, typically just after Idea's Speared Squall at the end of Disc 1, that's when our tier opens up a little bit more. Incidentally, I've always found it strange how when you travel to Dealing City and you go to Caraway's Mansion, he actually takes you to the parade route itself. I'm just imagining this senior public figure running around the streets with a bunch of high school age kids going, and this is where the sorceress's parade will. Oh, just give me a minute. Haven't had to run in ages. But seeing as though how Laguna doesn't care that he's parked his vehicle at the middle of the main street, I guess we see that Julia likes bad boys. Anyway, at tier 2, we finally get access to water, the usual mid-tier elemental spells, as well as some more powerful attacks like Bio, Drain, and Demi. Tons of enemies in the game are susceptible to Demi, and just status attacks in general, when compared to Final Fantasy VII at least. We also see important spells like Cura and Life, and a few more varieties of status magics, and really useful support abilities like Haste, Slow, Double. Our final tier should, at least in my experience, arrive just after you fought Idea at the end of Disc 2 and progress to Disc 3. This is obviously where we see the most powerful spells in the game from both a junctioning and a raw damage output standpoint come into play. We've got all the classic Final Fantasy spells like Holy, Flare, Meteor, and Ultima. We've got the final Arga spells. In addition, you've got your Quakes, your Tornadoes, and your Meltdowns. The theme continues to curative spells like Karaga and Full Life, and with status attacks like Break, Death, and Pain. Death specifically was left late because a lot of enemies are susceptible to it. It's also available pretty early in the vanilla experience, making it a little OP. Finally, we've got spells like Stop, Rate to Status Junction, Triple, as well with Expend 3-1, and Aura, which most will probably remember from the battle with Omega at Ultimesia's Castle. Finally, I think it's worth mention that I specifically created this lineup with game progression in mind. From level 1 to 19, the story is locked on rails and you can't really explore until the start of Disc 2 when you get access to Garden. Then your party can break that level 20 threshold with the ability to actually acquire the magic to utilize the system. Finally, well, technically at the end of Disc 3, but after the Lunar Fall, when you get access to the airship Ragnarok, you can finally grind a little easier and stock up on those powerful tier 3 spells. So this is how we're explaining each character's job going forward. Their stat spread denotes the tier of magic a character can junction. Each character bar Squall and Quistis have 16 assignable points. I have left hit out of this. This does not factor into any of the calculations because not that it's a wasted stat, but yeah, you can boost it, and like Squall's ultimate weapon gives you 255% and so does Selphie's, but you know, with other people it's kind of like, it seems a waste. Each character bar Squall and Quistis have 16 assignable stat. There's also a note explaining their role briefly. We have red, green, blue to indicate the associated magic or stat key tier. This color coding is used for weapons, magic, and character abilities, and grey indicates a stat or move that is up to the player. Weapons have been a little arbitrarily staggered because none really matter except for Lionheart. GFs are the summons a character can use in battle. Character abilities are the abilities they may equip based on what their associated GFs unlock. Commands are the commands a character can use in battle. Any character can draw, but they can't use draw, then cast. So first up, we've got Squall. In a typical playthrough, Squall's your main focus, and can you blame it? Awesome accuracy, a weapon upgrade that actually increases strength, Lionheart, and he's probably the only character that keeps his junctions when travelling through time, well, most of the time. Squall is the mainstay of your party, the damage dealer. Honestly, if it ain't broke, we're not going to fix it. However, we are going to draw influences from jobs such as Cecil's Dark Knight from FF4 and Bravely Default 2's Hellblade, where there's a focus on sacrificing HP for damage output while also focusing on spells that thematically fit that role. To make sure Mr. Whatever's not too OP, we can mitigate this through his stat spread. His HP and strength are his two highest allocations. Conforming to his role as a damage dealer, we've got scope to equip extremely powerful spells to his strength and HP. This is where your ultimas, flares, and triples go. You may think this makes Squall pretty OP from the offset, but because we're gating the tiers to all members of the party being at the minimum tier level threshold, but ensuring encounters scale a little more evenly. Even in the final boss battle of Final Fantasy VIII, outside of commands and Lionheart, we weren't reaching the damage cap, like nowhere close, maybe pushing 7k, if that. Squall's tier 2 magic allows him to still drift into anime protagonist territory by making him more survivable than the rest of the party. When selecting GFs for Squall, we want them to conform to his chosen job while giving him access to junctionable stats. A note for the GFs is that these are the GFs the character can use in battle. For opening up stat slots, you can equip them with other GF or simply teach the GF that stat junction. With this in mind, Diablos is a natural choice. Thematically, also Ifrit is, because that's kind of carried over into a few other games. And with Diablos, we can gain access to excellent stat increases such as, HP 60% and ability times 3. There's also Diablos' Dark Side ability, which expends a portion of HP in order to do a counter attack. This is why we have that high HP, but lower vitality and spirit, and even lower evasion. Not only that, through the use of Dark Side, you're lowering your HP in order to set up those limit points. With Ifrit, we're gaining that valuable strength percentage increase, covering some junctions, and also have access to Mad Rush if we're feeling spicy. Finally, there is Bahamut, everyone's favourite dragon. As we require Ragnarok to reach Bahamut, this should line up with when we have access to tier 3 magic to take advantage of strength plus 60%, auto protect, and ability times 4, but it won't save you from those ruby dragons before Bahamut. Squall's character abilities are from what his GFs learn and lean into his best stats. We've talked about increasing his HP and strength, and auto protect adds a nice layer of protection. Commands, you'll be leaning on Dark Side a lot to really output damage against tougher enemies. And Squall has the most economical use of GFs because he's not really going to be summoning a lot. Diablos is effective at any level, but late game, Squall will basically be the highest, if certainly not the quickest, form of damage out. For magic, Squall's more about exploiting his high hit ratio rather than spellcasting. At tier 1, we've got Zombie, Blind, extremely useful, and Scan, because someone's going to do it. Progressing to the next tier, there's Berserk, Demi, and Drain, the latter of which is an excellent status junction to recoup the health you're spending with Darkside. For tier 3, we've got Flare, Break, and Death. Again, Squall's not really going to be a caster, but there's an opportunity to make use of the character abilities that increases magic, while Break and Death are just good junctions. This should turn Squall into a proper Revenant blade. Rinoa, for better or for worse, fits the sorceress archetype both through the narrative and being the only character with more progressive magic growth than the others. In a casual playthrough, chances are you'll be using her or Selphie as your main caster in the party, especially after Rinoa gets access to her second limit break. Rather than fight against that, I decided to lean more into Rinoa's archetype. Her job as Enchantress borrows from your classic Black Mages seen throughout the series, as well as the Summoner class. In Final Fantasy VIII, Dea has the highest base compatibility with GFs, which kind of makes sense, so we've carried that theme into crafting Rinoa's job. Rinoa has the potential to be extremely powerful, with strong focuses in her magic, spirit, and speed. Whether you fancy junctioning Ultima to a magic stat or taking the risk in drawing it from Ultimate Weapon, junctioning something else, and having her spam triple Ultima, that's up to you. Whatever you choose, her damage potential can skyrocket. With high spirit and speed, she has good magic survivability, as well as the ability to really rack up magical damage quickly. By being smart with your evasion junctions, she can even have a good chance to dodge physical attacks. Of course, she's got to suffer somewhere, and it's most notable in her vitality and HP. Late game, without boosting her HP, Rinoa, at level 50ish, was probably around 2500 HP, but she's our glass cannon Enchantress. However, you can help complement Rinoa's brittleness with some of the other jobs we've got coming up. Tying things in thematically with the game, Rinoa is in second place in terms of the GFs that she can equip. With GFs like Quetzalcoatl, Ifrit, and Shiva, we're covering the main elements. We've also got Siren, Pandemona, Bahamut, and Eden to add some more variety. With this, you can effectively use GFs as shields to mitigate damage, with the potential of getting off more powerful summons at the end of it. Due to Rinoa's ability to equip a bunch of GFs, she gains access to a diverse range of character abilities. Obviously, you'll probably gravitate towards abilities that range her magic and spirit, including powerful late game abilities like Expend 3 to 1. For her commands, though Rinoa has access to Card, Dark Side, and Mad Rush, you're honestly not going to make that much use of them. You'll be relying on your GFs and your magic to keep her damage output as high as possible. While we mentioned a moment ago that Rinoa conforms to an archetypal black mage role, there's a distinct lack of mid-level elemental spells. At tier 1 you've got a handful of elemental status and even some curative magic, but heading into tier 2 we've only got 2 outright damaging spells, and this was done for 2 reasons. Number 1 is we can't go making Rinoa too powerful just yet when there's potential for other classes to equip spells. And number 2 is that I felt this kind of thematically fit into what happens at the end of this too, where Rinoa absorbs the full power of Hein from Adele, learning her new limit. As we mentioned before, this is ideally when that level 30 cap starts to open up, giving you access to Rinoa's powerful tier 3 magic. Spells like Blare, Triple and Ultimate create some really deadly combinations, allowing Rinoa to fully inhabit her sorcerer's role. And yeah, Angelum may help too. Zell's and AlkaFist. I still don't know what I meant by that, but it kinda sounds cool. And sometimes that's just enough. In this role, Zell takes a few things from several jobs, like a monk, dancer, chemist, astrologer, and draws some parallels with Waka from Final Fantasy X.
A lot of fiends here, y'all.
He's basically built as an all-rounder that can deal solid magical and physical damage while getting access to decent spells and very useful character and command abilities. Real simple for this one. 2s across the board, making him an excellent support character. For Zell's GFs, we've got some hints of the monk with Shiva, giving him access to abilities that boost his vitality and spirit. Cactuar is there for the evasion and luck. Carbuncle gives us access to reflect, counter, HP increases, and the ability to junction magic to statuses. Finally, Leviathan has the extremely useful recoverability so that the AlkaFist can provide great healing coverage. The majority of Zell's commands are focused on supporting his allies in direct and indirect ways. Obviously, we've got access to moves like Recover and Counter, the former being extremely important when considering which characters have access to healing abilities.
Skip lunch. You just can't, guys.
He also has access to a varied range of character abilities as well to boost basically all of his stats to some degree. Counter is both great in allowing Zell to attack when he's busy supporting other characters, and when a status magic such as Slow, Sleep, Junction. Other useful abilities include Expend 2 to 1, which pairs well with his restorative magic and supporting other characters. Speaking of magic, the AlkaFist primarily focuses on status magic. A ton of enemies, and even bosses in the game, are susceptible to status magic. I am looking at you, Idea, at the end of this turn. Double's not only useful on Zell, but in supporting other characters too, and with his setup, he has enough survivability to be a dedicated healer if you need him to be. Zell pairs well with a character like Rinoa or even Irvine, but we are getting ahead of ourselves, because up next, we've got... Like Rinoa, Selphie tends to get lumped into the caster camp. It makes sense. Of the main cast, at level 100, her magic stat reaches the heights of a whole 49 points. However, it's probably Selphie's limit break that paints her in the caster corner, allowing her to randomly cast magic. And no doubt the fact that she, I believe, has kind of the highest base compatibility with a number of GFs. However, our Selphie is built different, and she is going to be a Warden. Basically, she's going to act as a paladin. There are direct paladin references in other series entries like Cecil in FF4, and the paladin class in Final Fantasy Tactics Advance 1 and 2, and the Templar in Bravely Default. We can further refine this to take influence from Selphie's OG class in threading some red mage qualities into hers. What we're left with is a character that leans into high HP, vitality, and spirit with access to powerful curative spells. Her focus is tanking damage in place of allies and being able to revive or cure allies' stats and ailments. Her strength and magic, while not focuses, need to be good enough to get the most out of her curative magic and provide enough damage output to have a bit more utility. However, Selphie is big, slow, and unlucky. She may not be attacking often, which means you have to think more carefully in order to get the best out of her tier 3 spells and abilities. Luckily, we've got some GFs that fit into her mold quite well. Brothers and Alexander are some of the most overt examples of class-centric summons in the game, With brothers, you're getting important boosts to your HP stat with abilities, in addition to defend and cover to protect weaker party members. When Alexander comes into the picture, Selphie is able to boost her spirit and gain access to the revive card. Siren's there to mainly cover the magical aspect of Selphie's build and provide some boost to her magic stat, as well as the status defense. Our Warden covers the staples of any good paladin class. We've mentioned commands like defend and revive, but we can also utilize Siren's treatment command to cure party members of various status ailments. There's the essential cover ability, which synergizes well with Selphie having access to the bigger HP boost. You can also pretty easily crank up her spirit to levels where she can tank even the game's most powerful spells. Selphie's magic is now pretty basic. She gets protect and that's all she gets until we get Cura and the Aura spells at tier 2. It's at tier 3 when she gets some excellent spells like Aura, Curaga and Holy. With this setup, a little like Zell, Selphie is really able to shine when paired with defensively weaker characters to keep your party from getting sucked into a time hole. I flip-flopped a lot with Irvine during my casual runs. His limit break, when paired with a pulse ammo, can really rack up some damage, but because he's the last character introduced, as tends to happen with some RPGs, he kind of gets lost in the shuffle when you've fallen into a groove with your resisting party. However, of course, I'm going to be biased. I think he's a lot of fun. The Trickshot is modelled on a character that can hit really quickly and is able to status the enemy, buff your party, while still output great damage with a high crit chance. In most RPGs, I tend to shy away from classes or characters whose whole shtick is, shall we say, non-conventional attacks. Your dancers, alchemists, gamblers. Oftentimes, it just makes more sense to outright attack an enemy because it just gets the battle over quicker, and when it comes to bosses, a lot aren't vulnerable to status ailments. Not in Final Fantasy VIII. Irvine takes a few cues from a number of jobs, like FF10-2's or Thrall, which can enhance the party in various ways or inflict statuses and debuffs on foes. We've got a bit of a time mage in there too, as well as the Psychica from Final Fantasy X-2 again. Stat-wise, Irvine's drawing parallels with Rinoa in terms of low health, but the potential for a lot of damage. Evasion and luck, at least in my experience, tend to get overlooked when you're busy junctioning your strength and HP, but when you're kind of forced to use them, they can actually be pretty awesome. Of course, it's coming at the expense of HP and survivability. Late game, in the 50s, Irvine's not going to be breaking over 2500 HP, but he more than makes up for it with his speed and ability to just terrorize the enemy. To provide the Trickshot with his bag of tricks, we've got some pretty effective GFs on our hands. We do have a bit of a dry spot towards the start of the game because we don't get access to the GFs that he can actually use until we can draw Pandemona, and then towards the end of Disc 2 when you can grab Kerberos. For Pandemona, you're getting access to the Speed Junction as well as Strength and Vitality buffs. With Kerberos, you're obviously opening up Irvine to be awesome at support with its ability to cast double and triple. It has Status Junction, Auto Haste, and Status Attack. Later, you could pick up Dune Train, which is not only a really effective way to cast Meltdown late game, but will status pretty much any boss or enemy in the game. And finally, Tombury's there to provide important boosts to Irvine's evasion and luck to round it all off. The Trickshot, much like Sonic, has a penchant for going fast. To fully exploit this, we've got access to character abilities like speed increases and auto haste. When you junction haste to speed, tornado to evasion, and have auto haste on,
Baby, you got a stew going.
Irvine will happily take multiple turns before your slowest characters can even move. Combine this with high luck, a strength boost, and something like Aura or even Ultima, junction to luck, and Irvine is cranking out more damage than his health late game. He's also one of the few characters able to use the item command in the game. It's just him, Squall, and potentially Quistis. His speed really comes into play here because it allows him to quickly revive party members if they're KO'd. Not having characters constantly have access to items to get out of tough situations really becomes apparent the second you don't have access. Irvine's magic doesn't need to be high because his focus is not on utilizing damage output in the majority of his spells. He's there to buff the party with haste, cast status spells on enemies, or junction them to his attack. As we've said in Final Fantasy VIII, status attacks can actually be leveraged in a bunch of encounters, and Irvine absolutely makes the most of that. He can tear through Ultimecia's castle with spells like Meltdown. Even Red Giant ain't safe.
I have the power of God and anime on my side!
I saved Quistis for last because, well...
Wildcard, bitches! Yeah!
What?
Yeah, she's our wildcard. The inspiration most obviously came from the Mime job class, more specifically the version of Go-Go from Final Fantasy VI. Mime, introduced in Final Fantasy V, has the ability to equip 3 abilities at once. In other versions, notably Final Fantasy VII, Mime is relegated to a piece of materia rather than an entire job. That simply mimics the last move used. However, it probably should have just defaulted to Knights of the Round. What's cool about Go-Go in Final Fantasy VI is that they cannot only equip any ability the party has, but they also have access to all the magic the party's learned. What keeps Go-Go from becoming too overpowered in Final Fantasy VI is that their stats are kind of middling. At the time, when first playing Final Fantasy VI, I thought the character was awesome because you could just handcraft someone. So with that in mind, how can we recreate that? Rather than break down the class by section, we're better off speaking about the Wildcard bitches as a whole. Firstly, Quistis' stats are all locked at tier 1 because she has the ability to equip any GF, any character ability up to tier 2, and any command in the game. In this setup, Quistis becomes whatever you need it to be. You can go the full healer route with Revive, Recover and Treatment, Chuck on Auto Protect, Auto Shell, Auto Haste, and a HP increase. She's also the only character in this system that can draw cast. And because bosses and even random enemies actually have decent magic to cast, she acts as the universal screwdriver of the team. She is whatever you want her to be, without her being too weak to do anything or too powerful so as to foreshadow the rest of the jobs. So we've probably got to have some rules tying this all together, and I'll keep it pretty brief. You are obviously free to switch up things as you wish to make it more difficult, make it more easy. I don't care, this is just what I did. Number 1, any GF can be equipped to a character for the purposes of junctioning magic. However, only GF noted on each character's tab, also mentioned in the overview tab, can be actively summoned in battle and their abilities etc. utilized. Number 2 is you may only refine magic up to the tier your party is currently on. Number 3 is you may only use the weapons, character abilities, magic, commands etc. for specific characters. However, any magic can be junctioned to a stat. Number 4 is only one character may junction one batch of tier 3 magic to a stat. Example, if Squall has 100 triples on strength junction, no one else can use that spell junction. You may freely junction magic to elemental defense and attack. That's defense and attack. Party abilities are free to use. By party abilities, I mean stuff like Encounter Not. Number 6 is that you may freely teach GF's new stat junction abilities, e.g. if the main GF a character uses does not have HP junction, you can purchase a scroll. So what does a fully fleshed out endgame build look like? Adhering to the rules mentioned below, they'd look a little like this. I managed to beat the game with Squall being level 90 plus, and I couldn't help that. But Selphie was around 42 and no other characters were over, I think, level 55. This meant that we were basically fighting Ultimisia at her most difficult level of 65, I believe. It provided a fair challenge and I wasn't just sat there spamming Lionheart for a change. Obviously, this is not what you should do, it's just an example of how things work out in practice. And with all that said, this project was a lot of fun. There's just so much more you can do with Final Fantasy VIII when compared to Final Fantasy VII in terms of getting into the minutiae of building job classes. Obviously, there's still a bunch that you could tweak and iterate on, but hopefully it's an interesting thought experiment. If anyone has any feedback, maybe you've been doing your own job runs for years, I'd love to hear it, and feel free to leave me a comment and let me know. I have included the spreadsheet with all the information I showed throughout the video, so you, if you like, can check that out and have a playthrough of the run yourself. If you end up doing a run with the jobs I've outlined, I would love to know how it goes. Until next time, have a good one.